Hello and welcome to a new episode of Full Metal Mouse, my movie review YouTube page, which is sadly often unattended, largely because I haven't had a chance to go to the movies in quite a while. But one of my favorite things in the world to do is sit with friends and analyze films, and I'd love to do that more on this show, but it's kind of hard to find people sometimes. In any case, so this time around. As I said, I haven't seen a movie in a while in theaters, but I absolutely had to see Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them because I'm a big Harry Potter fan. And so glad I did. So glad I saw it opening weekend. So this section is going to be spoiler free if anyone's watching that hasn't seen the movie, but you should absolutely go see the movie because it is, and I'm never going to mean this as a pun, but I'm probably going to say it a few times. Fantastic Beasts is fantastic. It's probably my favorite film that I've seen in quite a while, and I've actually spent the last hour or so trying to think of a movie that I've enjoyed as much or more, like when the last one was, because there are other films that I love far more than this, but it's really been a while since I've seen a movie that's just so blown me away on this level, and honestly, part of me thinks it might be Avengers. But anyway, loved this film. What's great about it is that everyone expected this movie to be. This isn't a great example because it's actually good, but everyone expected this to be sort of the Star Wars prequels in terms of taking this beloved franchise, which is the Wizarding World franchise. I'm assuming that's going to what they're going to want to call it from now on because Harry Potter's not in these movies. But everyone expected to take the Wizarding World franchise and just sort of kind of like just hit you with like redux things, just the same way the prequels were like, oh look, C-3PO and R2-D2, they were everywhere. They were all over these movies. They were all, they knew Darth Vader before he was Darth Vader. And I don't think anyone expected it to be bad, but I think they did expect these movies to sort of do that, to throw in characters that constantly that you're familiar with and sort of redo the story of Harry Potter in some way. And what's really great about these films is that they didn't do that. What these movies do, or let me rephrase that because we've only seen one of them. But what's great about this film is that they created something that exists perfectly in the Wizarding world. It absolutely feels like a part of that. However, it's so distinct and separate. There's definitely it's a new thing and it exists on its own, but it feels comfortable. There's no, unlike the Star Wars prequels, which don't fit with the rest of the movies or any of those stories, this fits so perfectly in there, partially because, at least in this film, it doesn't touch any of the Harry Potter stuff. It exists in that world, but it's a separate corner of that universe so far. And almost to prove that point, they had James Newton Howard do the score instead of John Williams. I don't know. I've heard John Williams is retiring. I don't know if that's true or not, but they had James Newton Howard come in and do it. And the score, by the way, brilliant score. Love it from top to bottom. I'm probably going to download it very soon. But he also doesn't try to copy the John Williams score. So I kept hearing people say that the Hedwig's theme, which is the theme that everyone knows from Harry Potter, that thing. Someone said that it was in the movie. Maybe it is, and I just didn't notice it, which just proves a point because usually you would notice. It's John Williams. You usually are very cognizant of his score in films. And you're cognizant of the score in this film as well. But as I said, it doesn't try to copy any of John Williams' stuff. But it works in that universe. It doesn't give it a different feel but it still feels different. If that doesn't really make sense. It just fits. It fits without copying, as I said earlier. So I guess I'm going to limit that to my spoiler-free stuff. Spoiler wall coming in a second, but absolutely, if you haven't seen the movie, go see it. It's it's beautiful. For the roughly 2+ hours that this film exists, like you buy into these characters, this universe. Eddie Redmayne as Newt Scamander is absolutely brilliant and honestly far more likable than Harry Potter. No offense to Daniel Radcliffe, but I buy into that character so much more. And maybe it's because this first film isn't a children's tale like the first two Harry Potter films and books, obviously. But anyway, all the characters were great. The score, the film, it's well, I'm gonna get into spoilers in a second, so I'll get to all that. But go see the movie. All right, spoiler wall. So as I was about to say, one of the nice things about the movie, now David Yates directed it, and I'm pretty sure he directed the first, well, not the first three, but like the last 2 or 3 Harry Potter films, or maybe 4. Yeah, it might be 4, but one of my biggest problems with the 6th Harry Potter film, based on Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, book and movie both have the same name, obviously, was the dark palette. And the palette on that particular movie was so dark it was barely watchable. It's not a bad movie. It's just hard to see. But it was, I guess, in the mind of the director and the cinematographer and all that, it was appropriate because it was such a dark story. And, pretty much from the 3rd story to the 7th, which is split in 2 parts with the movies, the Harry Potter movies are pretty dark stories. I mean, there's joy in them, but particularly in the last 3 movies / 2 books, they're incredibly dark. It's a Hitler allegory. So, what I liked about Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, in particular, is I noticed that the dark tone was still there. So it's definitely the underpinnings of a dark story, just like the beginning of the Harry Potter stories. But the color palette was brighter. They definitely gave you a more joyful sense because it was such a brighter palette, and it didn't ruin the tone. There are a lot of echoes of Harry Potter in there. And certainly they convey that sense of wonder, from the first Harry Potter story. The sense of magic and wonder is so present throughout the film. And some of that is the character played by Dan Fogler, which is Jake Kowalski, I believe. Dan Fogler has been around. If you're not familiar with the name, you've definitely seen him. He's done a lot of stuff, and he's one of those actors that's tends to be in a lot of comedies and doesn't quite catch on, but he's really good, and he's great in this film. And it's funny, his character in particular is supposed to be this POV character. He's supposed to be the everyman, but there's never a sense that Rowling's script and Yates' directing is leading you down that path. Maybe it's partially because we're already familiar with this world, but in a weird way, Newt's sort of our POV character, which is a switch, because in these stories, the character who's never seen it before is the one you're supposed to follow, the one you're supposed to, that's how you get exposition, is you have a character who's completely new to this universe or these situations, and people are explaining it to that POV character. But I guess Newt, in his way, also qualifies as a POV character because he's familiar with the wizarding world as we are, and I'm actually figuring this out as I'm saying it. Funny enough, he's familiar with the wizarding world that we're familiar with, which is the UK one, but he's no familiarity or very little familiarity with the Wizarding World in America. So he gets to be our POV character, which is like I said, very, very interesting choice, because you do have that other character. And in that sense, as much as I like Jake Kowalski, that was his name, right? His last name was Kowalski. I think he said his first name was Jake. He didn't say his first name very often. He mostly called him Mr. Kowalski. But in that sense, in a narrative sense, this character almost serves no purpose. But he is sort of the, for lack of a better term, the Ron Weasley character there. He's the sidekick and the friend. But just interesting that was the choice. On JK Rowling herself, I'm very impressed. We knew she was a great writer, but this is her first screenplay, and as I was trying to explain to people, every sort of writing is different. Being a great novelist doesn't make you a great comic book writer. Being a great comic book writer doesn't make you a great comedy writer. Every form of writing is sort of its own, forgive the pun, beast. So the fact that she executed this so brilliantly makes me wonder that, and I love the Deathly Hallows film adaptations. They weren't perfect, but I absolutely love both of those movies. But it does make me wonder if, since Rowling was done with the Harry Potter books, like maybe she should have wrote those movies. She clearly has a talent for that. On the other hand, she was probably just burnt out after all those years of writing it. What I find interesting about Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is that very likely these films, this particular film is going to be, I'm not going to guess that it's a solo effort, a solo film, but the impression that at least I got from the announcements of Fantastic Beasts was that the films in this franchise were going to follow Newt Scamander, or Scamander. I always thought it was Newt Scamander. It's Newt Scamander. Kind of like Cobra Commander. Not at all. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, I thought that Newt Scamander was going to be the protagonist of all these films, and that it was going to basically follow his journey as he writes his book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. That is not apparently the case. At the end of the movie, he says that he's finished his manuscript and he's going to go turn it in and get it published. And Tina Goldstein, his love interest, it's going to be dedicated to her. So clearly, that's not the case. Now, what I was wondering, and I do have a bit of an answer that I found out. I'll get to it. Sorry, this is how I talk. I ramble quite a bit, especially when I'm talking to myself. This is weird, talking to yourself in a camera. Anyway, so Harry Potter's story was the hero's journey, in every sense. The interesting thing is that they sort of give you an idea that the Harry Potter character in this is Newt Scamander, and that the Lord Voldemort in this is Gellert Grindelwald. So there's a bit of a feeling that, this is going to be the journey to beating Grindelwald. And it's at least somewhat a red herring, because we know that Grindelwald is beaten from the books, I don't know if they mentioned in the movie, by Albus Dumbledore, who's going to be in the next movie. So if that's the case, then Newt isn't Harry Potter by any standard. So is the whole thing a red herring? Is it possible that Grindelwald is not the Voldemort of the story? I mean, he is on some level, that's fairly obvious, but my question is, are these stories not going to be about beating Grindelwald? Is Newt Scamander and Gellert Grindelwald, are they each smaller parts of an overarching story that doesn't have such a linear hero's journey fashion? Now, I was posing that to one of the other hosts of a upcoming podcast that I'm doing called Grim Grinning Hosts. It's not out on iTunes or your podcast catchers, any of that stuff yet. It's going to be, but I was asking him that, and he was saying that one of the producers of the film, David Heyman, I'm actually reading this right now. The guy said that Newt Scamander, or Scamander, God damn, it's gonna really drive me nuts. Newt Scamander is going to be more of a side character as these movies progress. Now, that could mean, and we know that Dumbledore is going to be a main character in the next movie. That could mean that Dumbledore will then become the new protagonist of the rest of the films. But that seems unlikely, because if they were going to do that, they probably would have introduced him in this film. There's really no point in doing that. So my guess is that this isn't going to be a hero's journey story where Gellert Grindelwald is the ultimate villain, but that each of the 5 films in the series of films will sort of flesh out the parts of the Wizarding World that you never saw, and maybe that's the ultimate point. Which isn't to say that this every movie will be sort of one and done, like an anthology. I'm sure Newt Scamander will be in the next film, and perhaps he'll be the star again in a future film. At the end of the movie, you see he's talking to Tina, and he promises to go back to New York and and bring her the book himself, which tells me 2 things. Number one, the whole time you're thinking, kiss the girl, kiss the girl. And there's this whole subtext of another character, Lena, I believe was her first name, Lena Lestrange, who was the girl that Scamander loved back when he was a student at Hogwarts. And the Queenie character, who's Tina's sister, basically just implies, but strongly implies, that he doesn't need a girl who's going to treat him that way. What he needs is a girl like Tina. And at the end of the movie, Scamander definitely gives you the impression that he thinks he's found that girl, that he does, if not love her, certainly care for her. But he doesn't kiss the girl. He just promises to come back, which might be a promise to the audience as well. But I definitely think Queenie and Jake Kowalski's story is probably, for the most part, done. We'll probably hear about it at some point in one of the later films, but I get the impression that they're going to be together, and that's more or less that. I don't know that there's a lot of more development to be done for those characters, particularly since they kind of not totally wrote out, but sort of wrote out Kowalski's character. You know, he could have easily, the movie easily could have ended with the 4 of them going back to England, because we know from the film that the No-Majs or Muggles are not allowed to marry wizards and witches in this universe. So they could have went that way, and they could have just continued the journeys of them. But at the end of the movie, like I said, everyone sort of goes off to their own corner with promises for some that we'll see more of it. But I think they sort of gave Kowalski his happy ending. He got the bakery that he wanted, and he clearly got the girl. So, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But, so I'm just fascinated. I really love these movies. I gave this a 9 out of 10 rating. You know, maybe that's a little higher than it should be, but I really, really bought into this. Like, I was with it with every moment. For the most part, a good judge for me, a good way to judge how much I'm into a film is by how little my brain's working as I'm watching. If I'm absolutely mesmerized, it's a great film. Now, perhaps not quality-wise, but in terms of enjoyability, it's definitely a great film. Because there's been movies that I'm like that, Avengers being one of them. That it's not necessarily the greatest film. There's certainly things that you can pick apart that don't necessarily make sense and problems with the story and all that, but I was there the whole time, and I was there pretty much the whole time for Fantastic Beasts. There were a few things that I kind of guessed. I can't remember most of them, but the ending when you find out that Graves' character is Gellert Grindelwald, that was kind of foreshadowed. They sort of not foreshadowed, but what's the term? They kind of showed their play beforehand. I can't think of the term of it, but it's a bit of a Chekhov's gun situation, because at the beginning you're seeing all these newspapers showing like Gellert Grindelwald, and you could argue that some of that was just to set up the universe, that this is what's going on in the magical world at the time. But I think they definitely showed their hand with that, because you can't have Grindelwald be that much of a presence throughout it without seeing something of it. They did that in the first Harry Potter story, where you didn't totally see Voldemort, but you did see the thing on the back of what's his name's head, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. So you do have to have that there. It can't just be a constant sense of foreboding, at least not on that level. Like if they had just mentioned it offhand, what's going on with Gellert Grindelwald, and then moved on, then definitely that would have been a little simpler. But so I kind of had in my back of my head that maybe Graves was Grindelwald, excuse me. I did also think, well, maybe he's just like a Lucius Malfoy kind of character, like a second in command or something like that. The only thing I didn't expect was that Colin Farrell would then turn into Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp. That was strange. It was strange. And you know that Grindelwald will, of course, be a major character throughout these films. If not the ultimate villain, definitely a major character, simply because you don't bring in Johnny Depp and pay him that much money for like a one-off cameo or, 2 movies. They could have gotten anybody to do that. But yeah, that was a bizarre turn. I didn't really understand the choice to use. I mean, I guess I understood the choice to use Johnny Depp on some level, but I didn't understand the choice to have Colin Farrell play the character. I guess it did add into the fact that I wasn't entirely positive that it was going to be Grindelwald. I do. Earlier, I lost my train of thought, and I also this is another little thing, indicating that I do think Newt Scamander is going to have a larger role later on, which is that they kind of play into the story about Lena Lestrange and indicate that something happened while he was in Hogwarts that got him kicked out. And I think maybe in the next film that's what they'll be exploring. The Lestrange sisters are a big deal, and I'm guessing Lena Lestrange will turn out to be the mother of the Lestrange sisters or something like that, or maybe an aunt. But anyway, I think I've gone on long enough about this film by myself, and but definitely love this film, the score, all of it. I am a little sad that Newt won't be the main character, because Eddie Redmayne does such an amazing job of really relating this character. When there's a moment when he says he doesn't have a lot of friends because humans tend to not like him, and it's an interesting performance, because as an audience member, I felt like I'm absolutely in love with this character, but I can absolutely see why ordinary human beings don't enjoy, um, don't wouldn't want to be around them. So I'm very interested to see where this goes. I'm wondering if we're going to see more of John Voight's character, because I mean maybe it's the same thing as Johnny Depp. Like, it feels like an odd choice to have someone like John Voight play this minor side character for one film, because he's in so little of the film. You could have easily used any older actor. I'm sure John Voight, while he's not like a $20 million player, it's probably more money than getting just some random older actor to play that character. And I'm really fascinated, and I'm expecting the next movie will probably be out in the next 2 years. Shout out to my former co-host Casey Moore, who always used to point out that a lot of these studios are panicking because they don't have these big tentpole movies anymore, and that's why you got Twilight and The Hunger Games and all these movies did and obviously The Hobbit being the best example. All these movies where they sort of pad out films to last a few more years, like, oh yeah, like there's only supposed to be one more Twilight film, but we're gonna make it two because stuff reasons. So I think we're gonna get these not Harry Potter, but these Wizarding World films. I think they're gonna be coming out every like 2 years or so, and I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope you enjoyed this rambling, or at least got something out of it. It's a little easier for me when I have a co-host, but none of the people I know that saw this film have or anywhere near here. So anyway, I've been Adam. This has been Full Metal Movies. Check out the Metal Hand of God podcast. Check out what else? I have Full Metal Mouse is my another YouTube show, one of my other YouTube shows, and that's where I talk about Disney and Universal. The BSA Comics Vodcast is a comics themed show, also on YouTube, not on this channel. But so I got 3 YouTube shows: Full Metal Movies, Full Metal Mouse, BSI Comics Vodcast. Obviously, my big project is always going to be the Metal Hand of God podcast. If you're not easily offended, definitely check it out. This is the Metal Hand of God channel. So, and you can actually find the show on we uploaded it to YouTube, so you can listen to the show on YouTube. Check out Grim Grinning Hosts, soon to be coming to iTunes. If you go to the Metal Hand of God podcast Facebook page, announcements will be made when that comes out. Anyway, very excited. I've been your host, Adam. Thank you for listening. I don't have a sign off for this. Goodbye.